All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Journeyman Podcast. We're at episode 31 today. And as always, we're going to take a deep dive into some source material that you, our listeners, have sent our way. So if you're digging this, make sure to like and subscribe down below. We're going to be looking at today an online debate that sparked some pretty heated discussion. Today, we'll be looking at a debate between the streamer Destiny and the theologian Andrew Wilson.
Yeah, this one gets pretty spicy.
It really does. And this all went down on a stream featuring Adam22. But today, we're actually going to be using Key LV1C's breakdown of it on YouTube. So go check out his channel and give him a subscribe if you haven't already.
Yeah, he does a great job of highlighting all the key moments in this exchange, which gets pretty intense.
It really does. So the whole thing centers around the question of morality.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hold two completely different sets of moral beliefs, one for yourself and one for the rest of society?
Right. And that question gets sparked by a discussion about Adam22 and his wife, who do professional pornography and are in an open relationship.
Right. And this is where things get interesting because Kyla, who goes by Iridite online, chimes in and says it's totally fine to have these separate moral systems. So she's basically saying that her Christian beliefs might tell her something is wrong, but she doesn't necessarily think society as a whole should condemn it.
Which Andrew Wilson immediately pushes back on. He's saying, how can you genuinely believe something is immoral and then not condemn it when other people do it? Especially if your moral code is based on absolute truth.
Right. It's like he's pointing to the tension that exists.
Right.
If you truly believe something is wrong, shouldn't that belief inform how you see everyone's actions, not just your own?
Absolutely. And this is where Destiny starts to get a little heated.
Yeah, a little heated. As Wilson keeps pressing Kyla on this point, you can see Destiny getting visibly more and more agitated.
Yeah. It's worth acknowledging that Destiny has a bit of a reputation for these kind of explosive reactions. He's not exactly known for keeping a cool head when he's debating, but it seems like in this instance, Wilson's persistence really struck a nerve. It did. And what's interesting is that Wilson continues to bring up this idea of conflicting moral systems by using a very stark example, murder. He asks Kyla to imagine one moral system that says murder is okay and another that says it's not. Can both be true. And if you are a Christian who believes that murder is wrong, shouldn't you condemn it regardless of who's doing it?
It's a pretty extreme example, but you can see what he's trying to do here. He's pushing Kyla to clarify her position. Does she believe in a universal right and wrong, or is it all relative?
Exactly. And Kayla tries to respond to this by saying that there's a difference between her personal Christian ethics and what she thinks is acceptable for society in general. She even uses the analogy, fine for me, but not for thee.
Which seems to suggest that she doesn't mind people doing things that she personally finds immoral, as long as it doesn't directly affect her.
And that's when Destiny really blows up. He starts interrupting, shouting, and even resorting to insults. He calls Wilson a dumb blue gremlin F at one point, which isn't exactly constructive to the dialogue.
Yeah, definitely not. But it does highlight how emotionally charged these types of debates can become. It's this clash between a more absolutist viewpoint on morality coming from Wilson and a more relativistic viewpoint that we see from Kyla and, to an extent, Destiny in his reactions. But it's not just about the arguments themselves. It's also about how those arguments are being expressed and how that expression can sometimes overshadow the content of what's being debated.
That's right. And that's where analyzing the psychological and social dynamics at play can give us a deeper understanding of what's really going on beneath the surface of this heated exchange. What's so interesting here is how Destiny's Meltdown kind of becomes a case study in how difficult online debate can be, like the very nature of it, the immediacy, the pressure to respond so quickly, the fact that you have an audience there egging you on. It just creates this environment where a reasoned discussion can very easily turn into these huge emotional outbursts.
Yeah, it's true. It's kind of like watching a car crash happen in slow motion.
Yeah.
You can see that he's getting more and more worked up, and you know it's not going to end well.
Yeah. And it begs the question of how much of Destiny's reaction is actually about the argument itself and how much of it is just the performance of online debate, you know? Is there a part of him that realizes a dramatic outburst is probably going to get more views and attention?
That's a good point. It's hard to say for sure what's going on in his head.
Yeah.
But it's totally possible that the fact that this is happening online contributed to the intensity of his reaction.
Yeah, but let's not forget about the main point here. This whole debate, even with all the drama going on, touches on a really important question that I think a lot of people struggle with. Like, how do you reconcile your personal moral beliefs with the fact that not everyone shares those beliefs?
Right. Especially in a world that's becoming more and more diverse, and you're always running into these different values and perspectives.
Exactly. And Kyla's trying to figure out how to navigate that whole situation.
Yeah.
You know, she's saying, look, my faith is what informs my actions, but I'm not going to force those beliefs onto other people. But Wilson's pushing back on that, saying, how can you really believe that something is immoral but be completely fine when other people do it?
It's like he's saying if your morality is based on something bigger than yourself, like some kind of divine command or a universal principle, shouldn't that apply to everyone?
Exactly. And that's where this idea of moral relativism comes into play. This idea that there is no absolute right and wrong, that morality changes and depends on the situation or the culture.
Which is a pretty tough thing to wrap your head around, especially if you've been raised with a more black and white way of thinking about morality.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's why Wilson uses this extreme example of murder.
Hmm.
He's trying to show what could happen if you take moral relativism to its furthest conclusion.
It's like he's saying if we totally ditch this idea of a universal moral code, then what's to stop anyone from justifying anything they do, no matter how harmful it is?
Yeah, that's a good point. But at the same time, I think it's important to recognize that in the real world, these moral dilemmas are rarely so simple. There's often a lot of gray areas and things to consider, like context and competing values.
So even though Wilson's murder hypothetical is a good way to get people thinking about the bigger picture, it doesn't really capture all the little details that go into how we make moral decisions on a daily basis.
Totally. And that's why I think it's valuable to step back and look at what this debate reveals about the challenges of making ethical decisions in a society where everyone has different values and beliefs. It's so easy to just get caught up in the back and forth and the drama, but the questions that this debate is bringing up are ones that we all deal with in some way or another.
Right. So how do we as individuals figure out how to navigate through this crazy moral landscape? How do we balance our own strong beliefs with the need to get along with others who might have totally different views?
Yeah, those are big questions. And I don't think there are any easy answers, but this debate gives us some good things to think about. For one thing, it highlights how important it is to be able to articulate your own moral framework. You got to be able to explain it clearly and thoughtfully.
So instead of just having an emotional reaction or throwing insults like we see Destiny doing, it's about explaining why you believe what you believe and having a respectful conversation with someone, even if you disagree.
Exactly. And to do that well, you have to have a certain degree of self-awareness. You have to be able to really examine your own beliefs and understand where they came from.
Yeah, it's like we're all being challenged to look at our own moral compasses and ask ourselves, where do my beliefs even come from?
Yeah.
You know, are they rooted in something solid, something that doesn't change, or are they more fluid and adaptable?
Right. And it can be kind of uncomfortable to think about that stuff, especially if you find out that your own beliefs contradict each other. It's way easier to just have a knee-jerk reaction like Destiny did than to really think about these complicated issues.
That's true, but I think sometimes that discomfort is actually a sign that you're growing, you know? Like it means that you're willing to question your own assumptions and try to see things from a different angle.
Totally. And I think that's another thing this debate teaches us, the importance of intellectual humility.
So you're saying being open to the possibility that maybe you're wrong, or that there might be other ways of looking at things that are just as valid.
Exactly. And it doesn't mean that you have to give up your own beliefs. It just means that you're willing to have a respectful and thoughtful discussion with someone, even if you don't agree with them in the end.
Which is definitely harder to do than to say, especially when things get heated, like we saw with Destiny.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But I think it's something that we should all strive for, both in our personal lives and in those bigger societal conversations that we're having about morality and ethics.
Okay, and that brings us back to the commentator's perspective on this whole thing. KEWLV1C seems to really like that Wilson keeps pushing Kyla and Destiny to clarify their positions. He even says at one point that Iridite's stance is ridiculous.
Yeah, you can tell that the commentator sees Wilson as the voice of reason in all of this. Like he's the one who's calling out the inconsistencies and hypocrisies in what Kyla and Destiny are saying.
Huh. And I think, whether you agree with Wilson or not, there's something to be said about his approach. He's not just throwing out insults or making sweeping judgments. He's actually asking these deep questions, trying to get to the root of the issue.
Yeah, he's basically forcing them to think about the consequences of their beliefs and whether those beliefs actually hold up when you really examine them.
And that's what I think is the biggest takeaway from this whole debate. It's not about who won or lost, but about the questions that it raises, and hopefully getting us to think a little bit more deeply about our own beliefs.
So to wrap up our deep dive here, I want to throw it back to you, our listeners. How do you reconcile your own sense of ethics with the things that you see happening in the world around you? Do you believe in absolute moral principles? Or is morality something that's more flexible and depends on the situation?
These are tough questions, and there's no single right answer. but we hope that you'll think about them and maybe even have some of those tough conversations with people you trust.
And remember, it's okay to disagree. In fact, sometimes those disagreements, when they're respectful, can really help us grow and understand each other better.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone. We hope that you found this deep dive insightful and thought-provoking. And if you did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the Journeyman podcast for more deep dives into these important topics. Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep those conversations going.